So you have to trust that the dots will somehow connect in your future. You have to trust in something, your gut, destiny, life, karma, whatever. Because believing that the dots will connect down the road will give you the confidence to follow your heart, even when it leads you off the well-worn path. And that will make all the difference.
Hey y'all, welcome to another episode of Connecting the Dots, where we connect you with inspiring leaders from all over the world, and especially people who get to travel all over the world. I'm your host, K.Short, and today we're joined by Joe Cole, who has lots of good ideas. But literally, that's the name of his company. It's Lots of Good Ideas Company, which is an acronym for Logic. While his formal title is CEO and Creative Strategy Director, he'll tell you that he's the Chief Ideas Guy. He cut his teeth in some of the best ad agencies in the U.S. and then struck out on his own to use his superpowers for good. Logic's main client is a nonprofit fighting climate change, and they are actively courting clients that are making the world a better place. But don't call Joe a digital nomad. He travels nearly full-time with his intention for work and art projects and the inspiration for both. He spends about 40% of his time in San Diego, and the rest of his time is split between his camper van and his seafoam green suitcase. He's a notorious overpacker, like myself, but he's also getting better at it. I can't say the same thing for myself. He's often found cutting shapes on the dance floor, vibing on the West Coast beach, or eating incredibly spicy food. His art project, Jupiter Sunsets, can most simply be described as movement-infused abstract live performance art. This year, he's expanding into murals and art installations. His artist ethos is inspired joy. His life motto is risk everything, and his company's tagline is dream bigger. He is proudly made in California, the best country in the world. Joe, thank you so much for being on the show.
Happy to be here. Stay tuned for tips on how to not overpack.
I've been looking forward to that. So, just off record, y'all, we were just talking about how we met, and I was telling him about how we met. We met at a Creative Morning San Diego, and I was telling him even from that first interaction, maybe a couple more times I saw him at Creative Mornings. And then we saw each other again at, what was the event called? Art Provecho?
I don't remember what the event was called,
It was
but I heard
another.
about it at Creative Mornings, so that's
There
why I
it
was there.
is. Yeah, and actually, I remember seeing a picture of him on the Creative Mornings Instagram or something like that, and he was like the welcomer, and I was like, I know that energy. Like I feel like it's familiar and synonymous in the sense I was just explaining to him, like, it's been, for me, difficult and rare to find folks who have this sense of curiosity and openness with others, and also like this excitement of just meeting new people. And I was explaining to him, like, I think for me and my observation and experience, there's a little bit, I think people kind of have their edges rubbed up against, more recently now, more than ever. And so to find people who are just as excited about other human beings as I am has just been super refreshing. So I hope that you all enjoy this conversation that we're going to have. I can only imagine where we're going to go. And especially both of us being ideas people. Oh man, I have so many questions as to like, how did you give yourself a job in being the ideas person? So but before we get into all of that, you all know that I love to know about our little beings and how we came to be. So you said that California is the best country in the world. You sent that to me, so I got to hear more about this and what that looks like for little Joe, being born and raised in California.
Sure. I mean, so yeah, I think there's a few things. One, I mean, California with 39 million people it's bigger than Australia. It's bigger than Canada.
Okay, so it
I
wasn't a
think,
typo, y'all.
yeah, I mean, California has the fourth or fifth or whatever largest economy in the world. There's so much variation in it. It's physically huge, especially once you start traveling even in the US, like it dwarfs most other states in size. But, if you start getting outside the US, like there are many countries that have their own flags, traditions going back dozens, hundreds of years, that are much smaller physically, much, smaller amount of people, than California. I mean, California, you could start in San Diego and not reach the top of the state in 15 plus hours, even if you were driving the whole time.
Yeah.
And I think, just influentially, it's had an impact on the U.S. It's had an impact on the world. California culture, Hollywood, San Francisco, Golden Gate Bridge.
Mm,
You know, the cuisines that are melting here from various Asian cultures, various cultures south of the border.
mm,
Um, yeah, it's just it's a great place. And also, I've lived all over California at this point. I went to school in UC Santa Barbara. I've lived in LA, Orange County, San Francisco, San Diego. So I kind of have a pretty good understanding of all the different parts of California. And
yeah.
then, you know, I think when I first started describing myself as being from California instead of being American, I think was probably around the time of like a kind of a greater political awakening for me. And that was
Mm,
probably around like 2014, 2015, kind of in
mm,
the run up to the 2016 election. I think that's when I really kind of
mm,
started looking at that and then going to a place where it's like America's this huge country, and I don't necessarily agree with a lot of the things America's done. I mean, you know, California has not necessarily always the best history there, but I feel much prouder of my identity as a Californian than I do as
mm,
my identity as an American.
hmm. That's really interesting because I recently went to an event and they were talking about how it was something like Save California or California Saved or something. And it talks about like we don't know what it is about California or whatever, but it's like we know that when things start here, it goes throughout the rest of the country. And so that's why, they were doing their work up and down the coast of California. And even the other day, I recently moved to Encinitas last week and I'm like 10 minutes away from the beach. And
Hell
I
yeah.
was just like, I live in California. Why would I want to live anywhere else, despite all these other things? But I was just like, I'm talking to friends and they're like, yeah, California, so expensive, things of that sort. But I was like, don't you think we deserve that though? Like, don't you like, we have a very short life. Why wouldn't you want to live in a place that's, all these options and what you're saying, up and down the coast? But like, what makes you think that we don't deserve to live the best life we can? If it so happens to be along this coast, then like, why not? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I 100% agree. I mean, UC Santa Barbara is right on the ocean, and for most of the last 20 years since my freshman year of college, I've lived within a couple miles of the ocean, except for a brief stint in Dallas, and then while traveling around, not necessarily always, but anytime I've had a place, it's been really close to the water, and I
Yeah.
think California has great weather. It has, so many different sorts of, nature activities, lots of different big cities. Um, you really have the opportunity to explore a lot, see a lot, do a lot. World-class music, world-class museums. Uh, and yeah, you do pay more, generally, but that's because it's more desirable. And I'm a very big member of the YIMBY movement. Like, I would love to see California figure out its housing shortages, especially in some of our biggest cities, and to figure out how to make housing more affordable. I think that would solve a lot of different issues. I mean, you'd have to tackle a lot of different issues to get there, but so that way people don't have to leave. They don't have to leave LA because they want to start a family, or they don't have to
Mm,
move like 2 hours outside the Bay Area because they're having another kid. Like, I think that's, or even leave the state entirely. I have mixed feelings on that because I'm all about uh, uh, you know people being California ambassadors,
mm,
progressive voters in more traditionally red states that in some ways are cheaper to live because they don't provide a lot of the services California does, or
mm.
uh, but yeah, I mean, I think that there's a lot of opportunity for California to fix that because yeah, why wouldn't you want to live close to the beach? I mean, you're 10 minutes from the water. I mean, that's amazing. Kansas says nothing on that.
Right. Right. And I think, I mean, people say like we're different kinds of beings at the same time, but like we're plants. We're look at all these plants that are thriving. We need some sun, we need some water, we need, a little bit of rain. Like it's perfect. So it's like all these plants are happy, we're happy, and I don't know, man, I mean, when you think back how, the world and the land was formed is like, oh, I was like, it's so how come the rest of it wasn't like that, But exactly what I was saying. I was like, happy to be here. Curious of you saying that, but a lot of people view Texas as its own country. You said you had a little stint in Dallas for however long that is. Connect that to as to why is it that Texas does, they kind of have more of the stereotype or the saying that it is its own country, but you're over here like, no, actually California probably has better range on claiming that.
I mean, Texas has a very proud history. They were their own country. I mean, California was also kind of its own thing. The U.S. is kind of made up of many different, parts which were purchased or stolen, or I mean, large swaths of it were stolen. But yeah, Texas has this whole, thing that they're a country and they still have the right to secede. And I wouldn't be surprised if that sort of thing starts getting louder there as the conservatives that run the state try ever more draconian means to hold on to power there. But like I'm very against gerrymandering in general from a both conservative and liberal standpoint. But yeah, I mean Texas is a very different place. I mean, I think when you have like any state that has had such a cultural influence, both on its citizens, both in the U.S. I mean, I think every state kind of has a little bit of that, but no offense to places like Kansas or the Dakotas, like there's not that many people that live there, and they're just not as popular in terms of like international culture, in
Right.
a way that New York, Florida, Texas, California, coincidentally, somewhat, some of the biggest states, population wise, with, their own lore and history and fans and whatever. But yeah, I totally see that about Texas. I've got friends that are from there, and yeah, they're definitely a bit of a different breed.
And now my curiosity is just leading me. You're actually currently in New York right now. So if there's any other, big piece of land and influence in our country, it would be New York. So what is your take on that? Are they their own country?
Um,
But I mean,
I don't think New York really typically thinks of themselves as like their own country, but I mean they are, and there's also like New York itself as a state is such a big place. I mean you got people who will argue like part of the Midwest includes upstate New York or even Buffalo potentially, and then you have people who will say New York City or nowhere, and
mhm.
I think New York City thinks of itself as its own thing. I can't speak for the rest of New York, how they think about it, but they've always I think it's a little bit different because they like I think there's an interesting thing with the U.S. in general, where people left their countries or their homes and sailed across the water, flew here, wherever it is, moved here. Like it takes a special kind of person to kind of, whether it was in the 1600s or it was,
You're talking about folks who, leave their countries, leave everything that they've ever known. I'm curious if that's something that's maybe a personal experience for you or your family. Like, let's go back to the beginning. You say you're born and raised in the country of California. What part? Let us know about family dynamics, cultural dynamics, and what it was like just being a kid, in this amazing part of the world.
Man, I wish I had a better story there. My mom was an immigrant. She came from Pakistan. Her parents were from Goa, India. Growing up was interesting, man. I like this is the thing I'm most thankful for my parents. They sacrificed to put me and my sister into public or into private school, which I think opened up a lot of opportunities for us. But at the time, it was growing up lower middle class and being the weird brown kid,
Mm.
uh, who's the poor kid, and now I know what actual poverty looks like, and I wouldn't say that we were actually poor, but for the poor kid at the private school is a hard thing uh,
Mm.
to be, especially when you're different, especially when you're other. Like I was always super scrawny growing up. I didn't crack 100 pounds until sometime maybe my sophomore year of high school. Um, so yeah, growing up was interesting. Yeah, I read a lot. My parents are fairly conservative, but I think where I get a lot of who I am from is actually the books I read. A
Mm.
lot of science fiction, a lot of fantasy, a lot of heroic stuff. So, I'm somewhat of a Harry Potter meets Han Solo, like, a troublemaker with a heart of gold, ready to rebel
Mm,
against authority, loyal to his friends, you know, self-deprecating in some ways. Um,
mm-hmm.
yeah, I think I owe a big debt of gratitude to the books I read, because I think those are really largely responsible for the human I am today. I mean, yeah, of course, there's some shared experiences and values from my family, but me and my sister were very alike, and we're very different at the same time. So,
Mm-hmm. I'm curious, and then maybe it's because we're here, we're in the States. I've noticed that the conversations I've been having, it's like we could have received any other, any other parents, but we so happen to get the parents that wanted to like forge their own path, to leave our countries, to, just do things differently. And again, what you're saying, you're like, oh, like that takes a different kind of person to do that, So like from the places you've been and obviously your personal experience and the people you've met, how would you describe that person and how that translates into obviously the people that they're raising?
I mean, yeah, I think that's the point we were talking about, is, people come to the US from these places. It takes a different sort of person to do that. And I think, even going beyond that, which is, I think, right before we got cut off, is, those people in turn, then the most risk taking of those people then cross the continent, end up in California. Um, but yeah, I think, in some ways it speaks to, many different things. It speaks to a sense of adventure, a sense of wanting to do something different, a sense of wanting to, spread out and propagate, and, to follow kind of like their heart and their vision. Like there's not as many people, I think, in the course of human history who have moved east, but I mean, people have done that as well. But I think, yeah, there's like a modern sort of romanticism with um, moving west, or whether it's ending up in Portugal or it's ending up in California, or going even beyond that to Hawaii or something.
Mm-hmm.
Look, chasing sunset. No, there's not really a lot of mythos around chasing sunrise.
Hmm.
Uh, and I don't know. Yeah, I think there's something really special about that, and I think that sort of dynamic, this quest for a better environment, to either be yourself or to raise kids or to start a business. There's a big reason with all of that, I think, in the California ethos.
Hmm. So tell us more about, yeah, what did you end up studying? I'm curious of like, again, if you're the ideas person, you created this business to be the ideas person. I'm like, okay, I got questions because I've been trying to figure it out. So I'm thinking, talk to us younger folks and younger people when you're forging your own path, but like, what has your path been like? So you got to school in college at Santa Barbara, you said, right?
Yeah.
And so what
Yeah.
was your major then? Were you undecided for a long time or did you figure something out? And then, yeah, just give us a little bit more of your journey.
Sure. Yeah. I came in as a history major, which is what I graduated with. I was briefly also a double film major, and dropped that right before completion of it. But I think the real education I got in college was just exposure to so many different ways of thinking, and also just being involved. I was in a fraternity. I was a tour guide. I was an associate students. I knew a lot of people. I did a lot of different things. I had to teach myself how to do things. I saw inefficiencies, and applied myself to them. I I got some money from my parents, but largely, had to pay for a lot of my own things. So I got some loans. I think I had a really varied college experience that kind of set me up, I think, for where I am now, and that I had a lot of different friends and a lot of different interests, and I pursued them all while still having a pretty good time, partying and going to shows and whatnot. I think, yeah, that definitely really shaped me to who I am now. A big thing though that led to my professional career is Facebook came out when I was in college, and I just kind of fell into it really hard. And um, I used kind of what I had learned, and I saw that there was a need for someone to provide information that incoming students weren't getting.
Hmm.
And I created a group, like a Facebook group. This is back when the first time around when those were important. That was designed for incoming students, and I wrote a bunch of guides. Like, here's the things you need for your dorm. Here's the classes I recommend taking. Here's how to, party responsibly, not get arrested or in trouble. Like all these different things. Here's how to get involved on campus, and yeah, that kind of like early stage kind of obsession and use of Facebook as a tool kind of set me up for eventually being in advertising and doing like social media for big brands. And that experience in advertising kind of brought me to a creative strategy level. And then to strike out on my own, to be this ideas person, I think it's because I'm such a voracious consumer of culture, of reading. I dabble in a lot of different things. I have a lot of different sources of knowledge. And I think that it's that kind of that scrappy, having to figure things out, using things in innovative ways, seeing connections that maybe other people don't. And I think that all kind of comes together to where I am now, where I can bring to an organization or to a brand or to a group or to a person new ways of thinking that maybe are ones they haven't considered or ones they haven't come across. And that's I think definitely a strength, to be able to come up with these ideas and give them to people, and then to also do the other side of it, which is also help them develop them as needed.
Yeah, I love that. I'm like, okay, and this is why I love getting into like, oh, before we were let loose into the world, it's like we were still a part of these structures and the systems that we're kind of trying to find our way in. And so there's a lot of similarities in there between us. I was also like in a sorority too. I was an RA. I was literally talking to my roommate. I was like, that's my favorite job. Like if I could be an RA forever, how do I do that? You know what I mean? I'm just like, what does that look like? And maybe it's in the hostels or whatever, but like, I think it was more the relational, making sure they're not burning popcorn all the time. But exactly what you're saying,
Sure.
using Facebook during that time, also having an affinity towards that particular transition. I'm curious of your thoughts. Who was someone who was also a student leader at the time? I'm curious of your thoughts now with this next generation who are not choosing higher ed as a place to land between those very definitive years. Like I'm curious of your thoughts and what you're seeing in the rest of the world, and then of course we'll get back to like obviously we're just in the transition of humanity. So well, again, I'm thinking about that was a place that we thrived, because of this structure to some extent that's allowed us to build this great foundation. Just curious of your thoughts of what can we foresee as we continue to guide this next generation?
Yeah, I mean, we're definitely in an interesting place. I think, we're at a time where more people than ever don't necessarily need to go to college to get like a skill set or an educational background to pursue certain fields. I mean, yeah, there's some fields which I think will always need more teaching, but I mean, I think you'll agree with this. I think the most valuable thing you get from college is not necessarily like knowledge in a particular field. It's learning from the people around you. It's coexisting. It's soft skills. It's learning how to present a case and then arguing it. It's being exposed to new ways of thinking, new patterns, in things that you could just never read about or learn about on your own. I think like, yeah, of course it's valuable to learn something about a subject enough that you can be like, yes, I have a degree in such and such. But I think it's everything else that college provides that I think is just about the most valuable for I think the most people. I mean, there's many people who go to college for whatever degree and end up working something that doesn't necessarily have like a great through line, to a casual observer. Like, how did you end up in advertising from history? But then if you look at advertising or history as something like the study of um, different cultures and people and um, countries or whatever movements or religions, all of that, that kind of like study, that deep thinking and that critical analysis, like all of that translates into advertising as well as writing creatively. So I mean, there's definitely a through line, I think, with anything that you do to where you end up in it, whether it's something that's directly related to your thing or not. I think in general, though, when you have a time where people can study online, they can be a remote student when they can learn a bunch of stuff on TikTok or become a millionaire by following some sort of whatever thing before they're even 18. Um, and yet those people are thinking, well, maybe I don't need to go to college. And yeah, I mean, maybe they don't, but they still need to figure out a way to get those sorts of soft skills, to get that sort of experience in a way that I think is really beneficial. And that I think that speaks in general to the need for more third places, fourth places, like places where people can make community, learn from other people. I think, whether that looks like taking a gap year, like for instance, this is the thing I've thought could potentially like a pie in the sky sort of idea that could fix a lot of uh, fix many issues at once in the U.S. is somehow the mass encouragement and adoption of most students in the U.S. taking a gap year internationally, um,
Hmm.
like between high school and college, and then maybe like in a way that like if the government this is again pie in the sky, the government gave every single graduate of high school $10,000 to
Hmm.
go study abroad, not even study abroad, just go abroad for a year. I think you'd have people coming back with all sorts of, they'd be brimming over with ideas,
Hmm.
passion, a way of seeing the world. I mean, talk about like, especially in a country where we have, what, 40 or 50% of the population has a passport even, and most of those
Hmm.
people don't necessarily use it constantly. Like
Hmm.
there's a lot of isolation amongst people, that epidemic of loneliness type thing, or there's just like physical isolation, like somebody coming from the middle of the country, like it's expensive for them to travel just about anywhere, and maybe they can't afford it. It's not a priority to them because
Hmm.
they don't see it as a priority. But if you put every 18-year-old for the most part had to go spend a year traveling the world, they'd come back with so many different amazing things, but especially a perspective on the world that is currently lacking.
Hmm. Hmm. I love that. I love you're like, oh, it's pie in the sky. But like, yeah, how can that happen? I feel like the solutions I've come up with, again, thinking about being a young person during this time, if you were going to keep them in school till 18, my requirement senior year would be like go work in like customer service. You know what I mean? Like
So
you need 1 year in customer service to graduate, just so you're not a nice person as you go out into the world. You know what I mean? Whatever. I don't care if it's barista or server or whatever the case, but it's like let that be a part of the prerequisite before graduating, so that you build those some character and respect and kindness around that. But like some people
absolutely.
never have to do that. So I was just like thinking about obviously kind of where humanity is moving sometimes. I'm just like trying to come up with ideas of like what can happen right before they go out. So I love that you're like, how long have you had that idea? I'm curious.
I don't know. I think I came up with it in the last year. Um,
Okay.
Something like it's pretty recent, but yeah, because I think that there's definitely you see in the U.S. there's definitely a disconnect between even people in the U.S. Like I was I was able to take I got a camper van in the pandemic and visited a lot of the US, and I've been kind of all over the US, to visit different cities. I've seen a lot. Just by driving through it, I've seen a lot. I've interacted with people all over the US, and I realized that there's definitely like there are people who don't leave their state ever or
Your
even their county,
neighborhood. Yeah.
Right. So, and then going and being abroad, I don't know, you just get this like perspective on things that is difficult to communicate even to somebody who's incredibly receptive to it.
Hmm.
You learn just, again, I think we talked a little bit about this before we started, like you learn about how other people are in a way that like inspires, changes, moves you. But then you also see like at the end of the day, we're both just people. Like, like you have an appreciation for other cultures, but also an appreciation that even if we're different cultures, we're still humans.
Yeah.
And, there's no need to hate somebody because they're different or other than, or, have these like, biases against them.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
Like I
Yeah.
said, I don't know that it'll ever happen, but I mean, it would be amazing. I think, when you travel abroad, you run into a lot of kids who are like on a gap year in college or high
Mm-hmm.
school or whatever. And, and oftentimes those cultures are some of the most like, you know, well-traveled cultures that are some of the most like, progressive cultures. Like I think there are so many cultures where there is, of course, racism, sexism, whatever it is. But I would hazard a guess that most of the people in those cultures who are exhibiting those things are just like people in the US who exhibit those things. They're xenophobic because they haven't left. They haven't met those other people. Like to meet somebody who's different than you and to like really connect with them it's really hard to hold on to prejudices or, you know, uh, an othering sort of belief when you see that, yeah, we're just human. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
that's as true for traveling to other cultures as it is for, you know, people who are racist to meet people of other races and just to like sit down with them, or people
Mm-hmm.
of other sexualities and just be like, oh, they're actually just people,
Mm-hmm.
you know?
I want to go back to being an ideas person. And also, I want to know more about the moment when you decided to like go out on your own and start Logic. Um, when it comes to meeting a lot of people, being an ideas person, what are the things that you've noticed amongst ideas people that we all thrive in? But then there's other parts where like, I'm just going to delegate that part, so I'm just, in that sense, because I think sometimes we try, when you go out on your own, there's maybe in the beginning, you're having to be all of it, in terms of starting the business and things of that sort. But then finally getting to a point where you're in your zone of genius, and then having people onto your team, that you can delegate things to. I'm coming from a early, early potential entrepreneur ideas person, but wanting to learn from your experience thus far.
Sure. Yeah. That was a very complex question. So if I forget something, please circle back to it. But yeah, where it started was so in my advertising career, I kind of held a lot of different positions. Often, often I was wearing many hats anyways, but also just within advertising, like working with people from sometimes specialized, sometimes wearing a lot of hats, sometimes a bit of both. And I got to kind of a point in my career where I was thinking about things both strategically and creatively and kind of fusing those together. Here's a fun hot tip for anybody out there is, um, on your resume and on your LinkedIn, like you could put your job title as anything you want. Now, you shouldn't necessarily lie and say like, oh, I was the CEO or I was the vice president of this when you weren't, but the company says you're a data analyst, but you're like, no, I was actually more of a data researcher. And that's like the story you want to tell about yourself. Like there's no police. There's nobody going to come to your door and be like, you wrote this wrong on LinkedIn. Like you're an analyst too, not like a data analyst or whatever, it is. But it's like almost every job title I have on my resumes and on my LinkedIn is a little bit different. It's more of that's what I was doing versus this is what the company said I was doing. So I never had a job title where I was a creative strategist, but that's what I was doing. I was doing, and every creative strategist will define what that is very differently, but I was doing creative from a strategic angle and I was doing strategy from a creative angle. And, along the way, there are many times like where I was submitting ideas along with creative teams and where my idea was picked as like the final round of ideas to be presented to clients. But I was doing strategy work. I was working with creatives, like giving them sort of the sandbox for the creatives to play in, like saying,
Mm,
here's the rules, here's the architecture. Now go in there and figure out what the campaign should look like. And
mm,
then, you know, I worked with a lot of different creative teams. My favorite creative teams were the ones that we could kind of develop a good back and forth where they'd come up with a bunch of ideas and I help them winnow it down and help them refine them and then they'd take it back and then they'd bring it back to me. We kind of like work in tandem or even just like camp out in the meeting room for a whole week and kind of like really bounce stuff back and forth off each other. I think that anybody who's like an ideas person, like I think one of our strong suits is being able to really intuitively like understand a lot of things, and off of a little bit of information, we can take that and extrapolate on top of it, innovate on top of it, and be like, ooh, now that I know like this data point or that this thing exists or that we want to do this thing, what if we, again, drawing on all the experiences and knowledge and things you've read and seen, whatever it is, and what if we did this other thing that's even better than that in this way? And here's why. And being able to back that up with, research or insights or history or whatever it is. Yeah. So, that was, yeah, advertising. But at the same time in my career, I don't want to say bad luck because I'm very thankful to be where I am today. But at the time, it appeared to be a lot of bad luck. I was often, because I was an early person in social media, I was often the only person in the company that had my job title. I had bosses that didn't understand me. I got laid off. I had managers who hired me, quickly leave the team or leave the company. So my advertising career, like I never really had this time uh, compared to some people where I got to like kind of like learn how to do everything a particular way, stay at one place, have strong mentors in one company, kind of like learn and grow in one particular manner. Instead, I have these like all these different sources of knowledge and ways of doing things, which is its own, I think, strength. I think there's a lot of strength in being more of a generalist. There's a great book called Range by David Epstein, which speaks to that. Also great. He has also a great TED talk on the same subject. Um, and then yeah, so because of that, yeah, I have like a very different way of thinking because it's from a bunch of different sources. There are like, and I'll be the first to say this, there are gaps in that knowledge because it's like I went to college, 7 different times at 7 different colleges and never necessarily graduated from any of them, but learned a lot along the way from different things. So yeah, in the pandemic, I got laid off and I was like, you know what, I'm done working on these giant, billion-dollar brands, a bunch of companies you've heard of. They might be in your garage or in your pocket or, in your fridge. But I didn't have a connection to any of them. I didn't really care about any of them, like in an inherent sense. Like there was like fun, interesting problems to figure out and solve. Like, ooh, we need to come up with a new branding for this, or create, redevelop their Twitter strategy, or come up with a really interesting way to use influencers, whatever it is. I mean, like one project saw me redesign the Twitter strategy for a automotive brand. Another job had me as an influencer strategist where as part of this was 2018, as part of that, I defined here's what I think are influencers, and then here's who I want to use this new subcategory that I want to call creators. And this is before like the creator economy and all that stuff. So I mean, it's like, yeah, we want to use these people who are creating and then you develop content with them versus people who are just influencers. There was a time where for a different automotive brand, I attended some presentations with a company called Musically, which was the predecessor to TikTok. And I was like, these guys are the next it company. Like they're gonna be bigger than Snapchat. They're gonna be the next thing to really break out. And they did, of course. But yeah, I got out of advertising. I was like, I want to do something different. I don't know what that is yet, but I want to do something that's not this. My first thought was, I'm somebody who follows politics, and my history major was basically the rise and fall of fascism, something I've been kind of sounding the horn about, on the Republican side for now over a decade. And so I was like, yeah, I'm going to go try to see if I can get a job, even if it's volunteer, with Biden campaign, or failing that, like another like Democratic campaign, because I think I have, if I can help sell, $40,000, $50,000 cars, I'm pretty sure I can help sell a candidate. And I found it was
Yeah.
really hard to even give my skill set away. In the 2020 election, I
Hmm.
was driving a camper van across the country. Um, I cold email campaigns. I reach out to people on LinkedIn. I have friend of friends be like, hey, my friend works here. Maybe I can connect you guys. Um, but everyone basically was like wanting to know, like, what's your political experience? None? Okay, we don't care. And
Hmm.
in a way that I was like, it was frustrating at the time, but again, I'm very thankful to be here. I think in a normal non-pandemic year, it would have been easy to walk into like a campaign headquarters somewhere and been like, okay, I'm gonna sit here and staple papers until you ask a question of the room that I know how to do, at a six-figure salary and nobody else has ever even thought
Hmm.
of. But yeah, there were no campaign offices to find. But what did happen is there was the Georgia Senate run that year, and there was a group called Creatives for Georgia that spun up, and it was matching people from the creative industries to the Ossoff and Warnock campaigns, as well as other sorts of progressive leaning groups. And yeah, I went to the first meeting. I said, "Hey, I'm a creative strategist." Got messaged within a minute of that, and they're like, "We need a guy with your talents." And then I worked in a Get Out the Vote nonprofit as a creative strategy director, interfacing with dozens of people across multiple organizations, as well as other like freelancer creative types. And our group reached 27,000 people, most of whom hadn't been reached by any other organization. And I don't know the exact numbers on how close those elections were, but they were both extremely close. Like every vote counted, and being part of that and still is one of the proudest things in my career. One of the having a hand in that. Even if it's a small hand. There were tens of thousands of people involved, from Stacey Abrams, to various Democratic uh, operatives and volunteers from across the country. But I also have a piece of that, and I'm incredibly proud of that. And that kind of woke me up. Okay, what do you want to do? You want to chase this sort of feeling. You want to do work that's making a positive impact on
Hmm.
the world. So then after that, I started freelancing with a company startup called We Are Rosie, which was and is they're kind of like changing the future of creative freelancing, like kind of a different way, reimagining it kind of from the ground up.
Hmm.
Held several different roles with them. The last one being, basically a creative strategy ideas guy. And it was through them that I actually met Duncan Meisel for Clean Creatives, who's probably um, that was where I was most of the ideas guy. That's where I was with them for 3.5 years. They were my client, and got to come up with high impact ideas, strategies, thoughts, campaigns, whatever, all in the name of fighting climate change,
Hmm.
trying to get the advertising industry to stop working on fossil fuel clients. I think when I started with them, there was maybe 30 or 40 agencies uh, around the world that had signed the pledge not to do so, and um, that contract actually recently ended, and I'm moving it kind of like being promoted in a certain way to being an advisor for them.
Hmm.
um, but I think there's now over 1,200 agencies that have signed the pledge. So
Wow.
it's yeah, again, high like if our species is able to get a handle on climate change and ultimately like come down from the very scary place that we are, I can look back and say I had a hand in it just through that work. I really do hope to land more climate change work moving forward. But yeah, I mean, that's the kind of stuff I want to do. Is I want to impact the world in really, really positive ways. Use my superpowers for good, and that's progressive stuff. That's climate change. It's working on campaigns. I'm also working on with a group right now called Creatives for Harris, really, really similar to that Creatives for Georgia thing, and working with different campaigns and creating our own sorts of projects, all in service of kind of getting out the vote, getting people to commit to voting, educating people, whatever it is, both up and down ballot. And but it's also working on stuff in the music and arts and creative scenes. So I think that ultimately humans are a very creative species, and I think getting people to realize that, to tap into bigger sources of creativity, to push their art, I think inspires other people, inspires themselves. And we're at a stage in our species growth where we need people who are incredibly creative to solve the all the incredible problems we've put ourselves into, you know and that's, yeah. So I think it's a combination, yeah, it's social good, and you know the art side of it, in order to inspire people in ways that will hopefully produce more social good as well.
I love that. I love that. Thank you for sharing that. I can just feel myself like tingling on the other side because again, like I can see how um the travel is playing in, the environment is playing in, the creativity is playing in, the ads, all that stuff, the political. I'm just like all of these things again, talking about being like this specialized generalist, and having a range of things. And so it's again, I'm just like, oh, finally, I'm just like, because again, we've just been put in the system like just specialize, specialize, specialize. And so it's so cool hearing how it's all interconnected. And I think for me, and this gets to be a little fun for me in a sense of I want to go back to the travel part just because, you were
Sure.
talking about how you were early on in in social media, particularly with Facebook. And so and what I'm asking is for some critical thinking and some convincing based off of all your experience. Um my take on traveling thus far. Um I had to ask myself, social media, particularly Instagram, right? We were using it and we were all I think Instagram specifically, in my observation, has really pushed like a lot of people wanting to travel, which I think is amazing and incredible. I'm sure you would agree. But I had to ask myself personally, I was like, do I want to travel because I want to travel? Or do I want to travel because, again, just some levels of comparison of like, maybe I should be traveling, or something of that sort. And so, I did a little bit here and there. And for me, my idea of traveling thus far is like, this is just people doing people things in a different climate. You know what I mean? And so I'm like, yes, like been to Spain, been to Portugal, been to where else have I been? In places. And I'm just like, yes, cobblestone, because that makes sense for this kind of weather. I don't know. So I guess I'm looking to you to be like, please, I'm curious of your take on travel. And I'm looking for us to I mean, obviously not to be convinced, but just based off of your experiences as to why travel is so important for you and when did you get into it, and also rounding it all together is how it's so important in the work that you do.
Yeah, so I mean, I first really started traveling way later in life than you might expect. I mean, my parents definitely, like, they love to travel too. They're a very different sort of traveling. It's very like road trip sort of thing. In a way that I didn't really like as much, in the way that they did it. So it was never really a big priority for me. Like, I thought about studying abroad in college, and I just was like, ooh, I feel like I'm gonna miss too much here. Like, I don't want to do that. Um, and so yeah, it wasn't until my sister's flight attendant with American Airlines, and um, I got her flight benefits. I basically got to fly essentially for free, like not quite, but very, 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 very cheap. And there was it was in 2014 that I first got those, and I went to Ireland. That was the first time traveling outside the U.S. as an adult. Um, and I had a bunch of friends that were Irish, so I got to go see a bunch of them, and you know, go out to bars with them, and meet them in other cities, and have dinner with their parents, meet their family, sort of thing. It was really, really cool. And yeah, it awakened something within me, and there was just this desire to like see more of it. I mean, I think I've always been someone who, wants to like either like, and they find something, like I read about it, I open up 30 tabs or whatever it is. I talk to people. And I think that was a lot of that is tied to that moment of being able to like travel somewhere and have a really positive experience, learn a bunch of things, see people, that I hadn't seen in a while. And also the fact that, the flight, which is often, one of the most expensive parts, was really not. And, for me, and that was an amazing thing, which I'm incredibly and will always be grateful to my sister for. Um, but yeah, so I had those flight benefits from 2014 to 2020, and especially once I started to get a little bit more senior in some of the companies I was at, I was able to like work remote. At this time, I started to have friends all over the U.S., so I was able to go to places, go to other countries. Sometimes working, sometimes not. There were times like where I was laid off and I was doing like driving for Uber or Instacart, and when I was I and then I'd do that for 1 week, and then the next week I'd go to another country. So, I did a lot of different things like that, to kind of see more of the world. I think I have a just about an insatiable curiosity for other cultures. I think now I'm a little bit different in that now that I've been to a lot of places, I'm not necessarily like, I'm definitely not some sort of like person who's bragging about how many countries they've visited and trying to just like tally, like check I've been to this place, this place, this place. I think now I'm starting to prioritize like moving slower, like spending longer periods of time in a country, like developing whether it's uh developing whether sorry, let's see, I'm gonna plug this in. That helps. Developing relationships, community in there while also working. Yeah, that's kind of how I got started into travel. It really took off. To be, there was definitely a point in time. There's definitely several points like where I'd be like flying every other weekend, every weekend, sometimes to somewhere else. And I'm sorry, what was the next part of your question?
I was curious about, yeah, just the love of travel. You said that you kind of in Ireland when you kind of got the travel bug, I guess as they say. Yeah, I'm just curious the expansiveness of what that looks like for you and how it plays into your work.
Yeah, I mean, I think as a self-described ideas person, I think you have to seek out as many different sources um, uh, to kind of cram it all into your brain to say, okay, here's how I'm able to come up with something new and exciting, whether it's on the art side or, helping a nonprofit try to like, do something on a shoestring budget, whatever it looks like. Um, it helps to have as many different perspectives and conversations and sources of knowledge in your head. That's, it's reading fiction, it's reading nonfiction, it's talking to people in your neighborhood, it's talking to people in other countries' neighborhoods. It's, looking at art in a museum and experiencing art on the dance floor. It's the more I think you have to draw on, the more interesting, unique, creative, whatever you're trying to do, whether it's just live your life in an interesting way, wear a cool outfit, whether it's trying to, work in advertising or a creative field or be an artist. And, a lot of that describes me. And I think that, that helps to, I don't know, to give you something, to give you a perspective, to give you different perspectives. And I think that's something you could really only do by being further afield. And that's, it's not just like exploring your country or your city. It's going, and it's not just going to other countries, it's going off the beaten path. And sometimes that means, in certain countries, you take a couple steps off the main road and you're off the beaten path. Nobody there speaks English. They've never met somebody from your country. And in some places, it's a little bit harder. Like you have to go to, you have to get like more into it. Sometimes, that's a little bit more difficult, especially if they're westernized or, it's, a lot of people there and it's easy to stay, you know, in a safe space. Like, oh, I have a lot of friends. I don't need to do the weird, the different, the interesting. I can go to another country and speak English the whole time because I'm just hanging out with expats or I'm just hanging out with the group of friends I came with or whatever it is. So, sometimes like it is hard. It is challenging. It can be, uncomfortable or even scary. to put yourself in a situation where you are in a place that's not, not necessarily physically unsafe, but just, it's unsafe for the way you think. It's like, this is different. You
Mm-hmm.
will be uncomfortable. And I think that, you know, I didn't come up with this, but it's like, in order to grow, like, you have to be uncomfortable. And
Mm-hmm.
if you're never uncomfortable, you'll never experience any sort of growth. And
Mm-hmm.
sometimes that's, through things that are outside of our control. A parent has cancer, or a natural disaster occurs, or, you're in a you're in a car accident, and, you can't walk properly for maybe the rest of your life. But then there are things like trying new foods and talking to people, in like they're half they're speaking half English and you're speaking a few words that you know in their language, or maybe just trading a phone back and forth on Google Translate, and you see things from a very different light perspective. Like, some of my favorite travel memories have been like meeting random people, and becoming so close to them that I had dinner with their family, or, talking with a bunch of expats, outside of a hostel, and just like learning about their cultures back home and what caused them to travel to this particular country and time. Um, but yeah, I think if you just have this sort of insatiable curiosity about the world, like, I think you'll naturally get to those places, like, where you'd be like, ooh, okay, this is cool, but like, what's over the next hill, or
Yeah.
what's the next town over, like, or, you know, and then it's asking people, it's looking at the internet, it's it's combining these sources. It's not just going where, like, oh, where's the best place to go in this country, and
Mm.
then just going there, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah. Have you ever experimented not being the ideas guy? Like, like you can be whoever you want in these countries. Have you ever experimented just being a completely different person, made up person? And yeah, how did that
uh,
go?
I don't know that I've ever experimented with being a different person in the way you describe, but I mean, like, over the past decade of travel, like, I mean, I often say that, I've been on the road since 2014. In the past, or maybe 2015, one of the two, like, in the past decade of travel, though, I have been many different people. I've
Hmm.
been I've been an Instacart shopper. I've been someone who works at various different advertising agencies. I've been a freelancer. I've been a person who's owned their own company. I've been an artist. I am an artist. And, some things, just like being the ideas guy is not necessarily. It's not like, hey, I'm Joe, I'm the ideas guy. It's talking to someone and being like, and this happens to me all the time, and I love it. Like, I think, as you said at the top, my company has lots of good ideas. And because that's what I do, I have lots of good ideas. This sort of interaction happens to me all the time, where I'm talking to somebody about something in their life. Maybe it's their company, maybe it's a problem they have, maybe it's like, they're like, talking about something emotional, or, whatever it is. And I say something, they're like, ooh, that's a good idea. Like, that happens to me, like, almost on a daily basis.
Yeah.
Something like that happens. So I think just talking to people and taking an interest in them, like, I mean, like, I think, like, there's a common sort of thing, like, where it's like, oh, like, let's not talk about work or like what we do. Because I think, like, that there, for certain people, it's like, oh, like, I don't know what to talk about, how to connect with other people, so I'll just ask them what they do,
Mm.
without really, like, being curious about it. It's just more of like, I don't know what to say, so I'm going to say, what do you do?
Mm-hmm.
I love learning what people do. I don't ask that question a lot, because, or not that I don't ask a lot. I don't always ask that question, because there are some people who will take that question as like, oh, I don't want to talk about work. Whereas, like, I'm like, oh no, like, where do you spend like a third of your time?
Mm.
How has that shaped you? What is that job like? And then asking them like deep questions, like, ooh, is this the thing? Like, I love learning about that. I love learning how people's minds think, like, what's
Mm-hmm.
shaped them, what's changed them, just how, like, we're having this sort of, podcast where you're talking about what's your perspective on this or that. Like, I love learning about people.
Mm-hmm.
And again,
Mm-hmm.
it's not something that can be taught necessarily, but it's just something that takes practice and
Yeah.
also like genuine, a genuineness, authenticity, like being able to relate to people. Those aren't necessarily like inherent skill sets, but they are ones that I think almost anybody can practice and get better at. Like I think almost to people's detriment, like there's a lot of emphasis on like, oh, introversion, extroversion.
Mm-hmm.
I think nearly everybody has some level of both in them. And I think sometimes people fall like, oh, I'm introverted, and they just kind of like retreat into themselves. And then they're like, and again, for some people, maybe that works. They really have genuinely no desire. But I think there's a lot of people who are just think that they're one or the other and don't think like, oh, like I have tendencies for both. So it's like, I think nearly anybody, if they want to, they're like, oh, I would love to learn how to do that, but I'm introverted. Or even on the extroverted side, people are like, oh, like I feel like I need to always be out and around people. And it's like, yeah, but practice being alone. Like I think of myself as more of an ambivert. Like I love I love traveling alone. I love reading a book, somewhere. I love doing things by myself. But at the same time, I love being out and around people. And I think it's being able to recognize that there are both within you and that you could practice at being anything, being either alone or with people until it's no longer as uncomfortable for you or until you get more out of it, until
Yeah.
like either can enrich your soul, maybe in like different quantities, different amounts, but yeah.
You talked about how in high school, you're othered and all of these things, and I'm curious about just the ever evolving identity, um, and transformation of somebody. Like when we're
Sure.
younger, people tell us like, "Oh, you're this, and that," right? Like or whatever. But like, I'm curious of like who is Joe like really, right? Like, what did people used to think of you as, and like, how have you recreated yourself into who you are today? And I'm curious if there's like a common thread amongst young Joe to now Joe.
I mean, yeah, I think we've touched on a lot of these things, right? I love to read from an early age. I think a lot of like a lot of my identity comes from these characters in these books. I think because of having not just being an immigrant family or a non-immigrant family, but being like a mixed race, half immigrant, half Californian, having one brown parent, one white parent. I've always been this different person,
Mm.
being the quote, as I said, the quote unquote poor kid at a private school. Um, I've always been a different person. Sometimes, I think when you're younger, there's more of a desire sometimes to want to be able to fit in and to not
Hmm.
understand that being different is actually good. Like I think that more people should embrace their differences while celebrating at the same time, of course, how we're all connected, how we're all, you know, similar people. As I said, everyone around you. I think this was maybe before we started. Like everyone around you is their own complex character with their own complex relationships and histories and emotions and thought processes. But yeah, I think that sort of thing has followed me out throughout my life. I've lived a very unconventional life. I've lived a very different life. Sometimes it's been successful, sometimes not. But I think that I've been open to learning the whole way and adapting myself. Lots of introspection. I think a lot of it honestly is due potentially to psychedelic use. I've done quite a lot of psychedelics in a way that I sometimes call it. I call it something that it helped to contribute to spiritual awakenings, emotional breakthroughs, creative breakthroughs. Um, but I don't think it's necessarily that psychedelics are the only thing that could do that. I think there's a lot of things that could do that. I think it's just being willing to push your boundaries to do deep introspection to look at the world always with fresh eyes as much as possible, and to, yeah, have a curiosity about how things are connected. And I think you could do that without drugs. I think you could do that without traveling. But it definitely takes a dedication to doing that. And then, yeah, I mean, I think that if you put enough ingredients into a blender, you're going to get a shake that's very unique, and I think just giving yourself the opportunity to have more involving your thought process, more, coloring the way you see the world, whatever those things are, whether it's lived experiences, travel, psychedelics, um, you know, uh, going through very complex um, situations, like dealing with loss at an early age. I mean, look, that made Batman. Uh, um, yeah, I think there's a lot to be said for that in a way that maybe doesn't always come from just kind of choosing the safe route, staying in and watching Netflix,
Mm,
ordering takeout for most meals, like whatever it is, like not traveling. I think it's a lot harder to get to this sort of different sort of mind state than everybody else around you
mm,
if you do the things that everyone else around you does. If you like, not even zigging when everyone else is zagging, but when some people zig and other people zag, you do something way different than either of those things. And I
mm,
think that's where you kind of develop new ways of thinking, new ways of seeing the world, um, new ways of doing creativity that most people just don't have the ability to even know about, much less to tap into.
mm-hmm. You've had the chance to see plenty of places, I'm sure. If we were to take all of this away, the way that we do humanness now, what do you feel like your role in the tribe was?
So when you say take all of this away, what is this?
Just how we're, the airplanes and the cars and trains and automobiles and whatever, all these things that we get to enjoy nowadays. If we just went back to bare bones, back to our tribal days, um, you know, few centuries ago, what would your role in the tribe be?
Wow. Somewhere between a shaman and a spy.
A
I
spy?
don't
What are
know.
you
I don't know.
spying on?
That's what I'm saying. I don't know if tribes have a need for spying, but someone who's like maybe a scout, like looking ahead, um, a visionary, someone who's trying
Hmm.
to keep the needs of everybody else in mind while also,
Hmm.
doing things a little bit differently than most.
Hmm.
Like
Hmm.
I've often not necessarily thought back to like the tribe days, but like, in olden times, I think I would have been somewhere, yeah, somewhere between like a spy and like a like some sort of like mystical like advisor sort of.
Yeah. Would we have to climb to a mountain to get your wisdom? Or would you be accessible to the community or to the tribe?
I think I don't know. Like there, like in my industry, there's a lot of value from people who kind of become these like quote unquote leaders. Like they publish their thoughts
Hmm.
and they're really regular about it. It's a great way to find new clients, to build an audience, start a podcast, whatever it is, right? And you get
Hmm.
that. Uh, but I don't know. It's not that I don't have interest in that. It's that I guess I'd rather do things than like tell people so I guess it'd be, if you take that mentality out, it's like, yeah, I'm somewhat on top of the mountain, but at the same time, I do want to have an impact.
Hmm.
So, maybe be someone who's on top of the mountain, but also, occasionally takes the time to travel into the city and, have that conversation with the people,
Hmm.
who can affect the change. Cause that is what I try to do, right? I try to find the people who are doing the things, figure out how to get that audience with them, and then
Hmm.
try to pitch them on helping them, even if it's just like, hey, let's have some conversation sometimes, or it's like actual paid work. And I think that's one of the things that my company, ideally, once we figure out how to really scale that up, I think it will be a very different thing to be able to help people at all stages of their nonprofit or their startup or whatever it is, artists who they don't have a team, they don't have anybody working for them, but giving people ideas and concepts that they can ideate on without expecting anything in return. I think there's this is a little bit of like the Burning Man sort of ethos, like gifting, is one of the 10 principles, like being able to give away ideas and then see that develops relationships, or even just working on different problems develops your thoughts for other problems. Um, it's something that I need to get better at as a company is, finding the right balance between um, work that kind of essentially is free work and work that's paid. But because I'm trying to work with, exclusively with companies and brands and nonprofits that are making the world better, like at the same time, I'm kind of like, I'm making the world better. Like that's just what I'm doing.
Yeah.
But as I continue to figure this out, I mean, this will be something that continues to be lucrative in ways that include financial, but also go beyond that. I mean, I think just as an artist, like it's been really great to do work that's creative, that opens up new doors, both in real life and also within my head for my art project. And then, a lot of times I'm traveling and there's a art or business connection, or failing all that, there's always the inspiration for the creative ideas, for the creative art projects. Um, so it kind of like I live this sort of like symbiotic life with myself, and that everything I do feeds into everything else I do.
Hmm. And speaking of all that you do and all that you've done and all that you will do, are you like in the season you're in right now, what are you currently craving?
And you said in the season I'm in right now, what am I
Yeah,
currently craving?
just what are you currently craving?
I think the thing that I'm craving the most is um the thing that I think I'm craving the most is just a little bit of stability in order to flesh out some of the steps that I have to take over the next few years in order to get my company and my art projects to where they I think they can go. Like as far as I'm concerned with both of them, I'm on the ground floor, and and I think both can be a rocket ship that can go straight up. Um, and yeah, just a little bit of the stability needed, I think, to flesh out certain things on both the business and art side. I think I'm very much a person who kind of dives in head first and doesn't necessarily figure out all the back end stuff. Just kind of like a little bit of a procrastination nature, a little bit of like I'm still figuring it out. And then is able to, with both my company and my art side, like was able to figure out some measures of success in order to keep kind of pushing upward instead of like consolidating and figuring things out, which is both, I think, a blessing and a curse. I think that a lot of people never leave once they get comfortable and safe, like, oh, I have a few clients, I'm making enough money to get by, or, I'm making enough money, more than enough money to get by. I don't need to like figure it out or do anything more. It's like
Mm,
I'm done. Or
mm,
same with artists. I think many artists, they get good at something and then they get known for that, and then that's all they
mm,
do.
mm,
I'm much more interested in artists like David Bowie, who like did so many different art forms and had periods of time where he concentrated on one look or one sort of thing, and then continuously weaved it all together. Like
mm.
that's more of a model for what I'm trying to do, which is to constantly innovate, constantly do things that no one else has thought of. Um, because I think that's how you eventually scale up. Eventually, you keep doing things and you kind of keep leapfrogging upwards, and that's where you find, I think, a true measure of once you've done it big enough,
Mm,
that's where the recognition comes in. I think the other way, of course, is to just hone your craft in one area and hope to hit it, but that way just doesn't hold the excitement to me. That's somebody going to the same vacation for 30 years, the same
mm.
place, the same time, the same people. Like I'm always gonna, wanting to do something different to change my point of view, even as I change who I am. And I think
Yeah.
I don't know. I think that's powerful.
Yeah. And
Even if I don't
Joe,
have it all figured out, I believe that it will.
yeah, I believe that you will too, more so than lots of folks, and being able to go out there in the world and see how other people are doing things. And so, Joe, with my final question, from all that you've seen and all that you've done and will continue to do, I'm curious of what your thoughts are on in just like the state of humanity right now. You've seen a lot of people, you've had the chance to gather some great stories, some great wisdom and experiences. And, being from the country of California, what are your thoughts on where we're at as humans right now? And what do you think needs to happen for us to continue to coexist with each other in this world that we have?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, you know, more than nearly every other time in history, I mean, we're at a precipice, right? There's a lot of incoming problems, what from, world politics, from climate change, um, to things exacerbated by climate change, which includes world politics, destabilization of countries, droughts. Um, you have various, fanatical leaders who are, whether they're in small or big countries that are making life harder for them or their neighbors. I mean, you see Russia and Ukraine as just one prominent example. And at the same time, I think if you dig under the surface, you see all sorts of amazing, inspiring stories.
Hmm.
I think that humanity is at a crossroads, or is nearly at a crossroads, where in order to continue on as a species for you know humanity's been around for what, call it 300, 400,000 years. Like, in order to continue for another 300, 400,000 years, I think we're at a critical juncture. And I think, there's been many critical junctures in the last, 50 years. The, you know, the atomic age, the space age, and, now we have climate change. We have, AI, who knows what that's going to lead to. But at the same time, I think that I have a limitless hope and optimism that humanity will figure out our problem. We always have. That's the hallmark of our species. We're endlessly creative, endlessly innovative. We 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 say, hey, let's start using this as a tool to do this thing, to make our lives better. Doesn't
Hmm.
always work. We invent new problems for ourselves as our species grows, and then we have to figure those out. And but I I think that I have optimism, I have hope, and I have faith that humanity will ultimately triumph, because at the end of the day, that's who we are. But I think it's going to take a lot of bravery. I think it's going to take. There will be growing pains. Things will have to change. There will be compromise that maybe not everyone likes, but yeah, I think if humanity can continue to tap into, um, you know, the thing that the trends I'm seeing nowadays, particularly amongst young people, concerning um, politics, concerning climate change, concerning community, um, uh, concerning, like, um, how money is moved, around. I don't know. I have an incredible amount of faith that our species will continue to figure it out, and I think it's up to people like me and you, and people listening to this podcast, to do what they can within their communities or their countries, or wherever they are, to continue to foster this sense of camaraderie, this sense of optimism, to 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 do the work, both internally and externally. Like, eh,
Mm.
everyone needs to be a participant. Like, if you're standing on the sidelines waiting for somebody else to do it, it's that's not going to work.
Hmm.
Get
Hmm.
out there, participate, be part of it, be part of the solution, figure out how you can help, lend a hand, pitch in.
Love that. Love that. Joe, thank you so much for just sharing your story thus far. Thank you so much for working through the persistence of technology, of what we get to do, being on completely different sides of this country, and of course also enjoying the times that we're with each other in San Diego. Yeah, just thank you so much. Like I just getting to sit with you and listen to you, I'm just like, wow, like this being has had a lot of experience in these certain areas that just make so much sense. Like even talking to you about like what do you foresee what's going to happen next or what needs to be done, and of course going back to, oh, like I majored in history, you know what I mean? Like I actually studied this stuff, and you're like,
Yeah.
well, history is still to some extent probably repeating itself, and this is where we're at, and having still this sense of hope and seeing how your advertising has been playing into the work that you do with your company, and then of course like bringing it all back around to just like our tribal days, and also more importantly and even lastly, as potentially just being this shaman of today's world. Yeah, I just want to say thank you so much for just being here and for being persistent and working through this conversation and interview. But more importantly, thank you for
For
just
sure.
being you, so good. So good.
Oh yeah.
So I think of
Yeah,
course,
sure.
my
This has
last
been great.
question. Yeah, my last question is, where can they find you? Where can they, get to know you more and potentially, continue to find more great ideas from you?
Yeah, I mean, man, I wish I had a better answer here. I'm Neon Think at Instagram, but I feel like I don't update it as well as I should. And that's probably the best place. I've got various websites and other social platforms, but if you're really trying to connect with me and see at least what I'm up to on a day-to-day basis, that's probably it.
I love that. And hopefully being safe in your van. Goodness gracious. Any last words from the shaman, from Neon Think, from Joe Cole?
Um, man, yeah, let's see. One last thing. Challenge yourselves and challenge everything.
I love that. I love that. All right, y'all. Thank you again so much for watching this episode. Thank you so much for tuning into Connecting the Dots. Don't forget to subscribe if that's something that you want for more inspiring episodes. And make sure to join us next time as we continue to connect the dots with leaders and visionaries who are making a difference. Until then, keep striving for your next breakthrough and embracing your potential. All right, y'all. Let's talk to you soon. Bye now.
So you have to trust that the dots will somehow connect in your future. You have to trust in something, your gut, destiny, life, karma, whatever. Because believing that the dots will connect down the road will give you the confidence to follow your heart, even when it leads you off the well-worn path. And that will make all the difference.